Hi, everyone. Welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. Welcome back, I hope, or welcome for the first time if you have never been with me before. Bible 365 is me going through the chronological Bible in 365 days using the One Year Chronological Bible reading plan, which you can find online at the One Year Chronological Bible online.com. And today I'm in Deuteronomy. And, what's funny is I think that as the days go by, some of it starts to get like a little bit monotonous. I know some of these books are really hard, and some of you might be like, oh, I can't wait till this is over. Today, was absolutely not one of those days for me. Today, I was really excited about the reading. When I was reading it, I just thought it just was such a good reading. It's coming to the end, Moses's final days, and I feel like God's really kind of digging in and reaching out to talk to these people, and just to kind of, in some ways, to kind of shake them up, and to remind them of who they are. And when you know who you are, you know the God you serve. And I think that again causes us to love him more and to remember his promises. So today is it's day 80. And if you are working with me on the exact calendar, it is 3/20, March 20th. And we're going through Deuteronomy 29:2 through 31:29. And when I know I've been saying sort of like we've been coming to the end. This is kind of really it. I think tomorrow was our last day in Deuteronomy. So we're really coming to the finish line of Deuteronomy. It's Moses' last days on the earth. He knows it. So he knows what's coming. He knows that God is the one who told him it's over. He knows that it is over because he did not consider God holy in some of the things that he did. The Israelite people didn't as well. And so he is in charge and responsible for the Israelite people. And so a payment is made. And so the payment, unfortunately, is that Moses doesn't go into the land flowing with milk and honey, which obviously sounds like an amazing thing. They have a lot of food. They have a lot of good stuff. I have neighbors and they're out back. And so I'm sure you hear them. I hope it's not a distraction, because I just like to be out back and to enjoy the sun. Anyway, sorry, I went off tangent. So just a little bit about what's happening and what's going on is like I said, Moses is in his final days. If you have never been with me today or before today, please finish this, listen. Hopefully you enjoy it, and then go back to the beginning and read from the beginning. I know I'm sharing with a couple of friends just some of the excitement of building this foundation. And we've read it before, right? So this isn't necessarily the first time for the people I've been talking to. So we've read it before. So the excitement is knowing what's to come and knowing the things that Jesus says and does, and then how all of this builds up into that. And you can really start to see when you can start to see when he talks to these people where he's coming from and what all of this is, what it's all about, and why it's so important, and the depth of then what Jesus does. So let's continue. Moses has saved the people of Israel. The people of Israel were slaves for several hundred years. God heard them crying out. And so through God's power, Moses did a lot of miracles. We call them plagues: locusts, frogs, darkness, death of firstborn son, all of these things, so that the world can see who God is and see the power and the might of the mighty God, the one and only God. And so he drew these people up from nothing, from they were slaves towards the Egyptians, and he brought them out, and he's bringing them now into this land to be with God for the rest of their lives, and preferably for eternity, right? God has made a covenant with these people so he can be with them. He has offered them the covenant so they can have a place in his kingdom. So lots of trials and tribulations have happened, but now they're right on the edge and the border of crossing over into the land of Canaan that has been given to them, and that has everything provided for them. Again, this is why he's calling it the land of milk and honey, because it's already got animals and food and anything that they need, cities and towns and houses and crops and anything they need to survive. And God is bringing them into this land because he's chosen to, because he loves his people and he wants to be with his people, and so that you can see who God is. And so in this book, Moses is reiterating some things to some people. So coming to the end of this, in Moses 29:2, just starting kind of in the beginning of Moses or I'm sorry, in chapter 29. So it says, Moses summoned all the Israelites and said to them, Moses has given a few speeches up to this point, and so it seems like sometimes he meets with all the Israelites, sometimes he just meets with the elders and the people in charge. At this point, as far as we go down a couple of verses, and it says with everyone, it's men, it's women, it's children, it's foreigners, right? So it's every single person that is going to go into the land of Canaan, and so he's summoning them all out because he wants everyone to hear this. This is important for every single person to hear. It's for them to note, and it's for them to hold inside their hearts. Remember, he said something about circumcising hearts a few weeks ago. So we want to know that that they have the covenant with God, with him as his people, and so they're going to remember all these things when they go into the land. So, starting with that first verse, he says, "Your eyes have seen all the Lord did in Egypt to Pharaoh, to all his officials, and to all his hand. With your own eyes you saw it." So he's reminding these people. I mean, probably not. I mean, obviously the kids didn't. They've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, but it's a general statement for the majority of the people in that land. At one point, although their older generation died out, this younger generation knows exactly what God did because they saw the miracles with their own eyes. And it's a good thing to remember for the very reason that miracles still happen around us. Some of them are extraordinary miracles, like we see miraculous healings. Other countries see people rising from the dead, right? So there are these miraculous healings in God's name, or miraculous bounties, like whatever it might be. There's all these things in God's name. And so to remember that when you see them, to note them and not forget them. So then when we are in this time of turmoil and trouble, we're going to remember that God did all of these things for us. So anyway, so he says, you see them with your own hands. So verse 4, I think, is the important one. But to this day, the Lord has not given you a mind that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear. So he has not granted them, and this is what I think about it. So I'm going to be very clear with what I think, because this might be an expression that they use really often, and I'm not really sure. But what I know is that they saw it with their own eyes. So to say your eyes haven't seen, well, we know that they have seen the actual miraculous things that happen, but God has not granted them the eyes to see and hear. And I'm going to say the full picture. I think if we knew the full picture, there's just no way we could turn away from who God is, right? But I think at this point we have not been granted the full, whether we are unable to be granted the full picture, or whether we're not ready to be granted the full picture, whether we can, I don't know why, but he's saying that the Israelites have not been granted with their minds to hear, to what does it say? So to be exact, he's not been given them a mind that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear. Yet, the Lord says, but during the 40 years that I led you through the wilderness, your clothes didn't wear out, nor did the sandals on your feet. You ate no bread and drank no wine or other fermented drink. I did this so that you might know that I am the Lord your God. So he didn't grant them what I'm going to say is a full picture, right? I'm going to use that and take it with it what you will. But you've seen all this. You've lived through all of this. You know that your shoes didn't wear out. You know that you didn't get holes in your clothing. You saw all the things that God did, right? So there is a piece of you in your heart that knows all of these things. You have a very clear understanding that something kept you. You lived in Egypt, right? You lived through a very hard time in life. You know what happened. You know shoes wear out. I think I said this before because he's mentioned it in another thing. My sneakers wear out every 3 months, right? My feet start hurting, my knees, my back, right? I go to the gym all the time. So I got to get new stuff. My pants do not stay fresh and clean all the time. I got to get new clothing, new tops, right? So that stuff wears out. The strings start to fall out. It would be a miracle if my stuff stayed for 40 years. They know that their stuff stayed for 40 years. They recognize that stuff did not wear out. And so he's like, remember this. Don't forget. So even though you don't have full understanding, these things you know. And it says that you might know that I am the Lord your God. Over and over and over and over and over again in Deuteronomy, and actually in all the law books, all the books that Moses has written. He keeps calling God the Lord. And I know I mentioned it before what the Lord means. But here he says, the Lord, your God. So what we tend to combine is two words. He's made two separate words. And in the Hebrew, they actually are two separate words. So the Lord is more like Yeshua. I'm not pronouncing it perfectly. And God is Elohim. So they are two distinctly different words. And I think this is great because Elohim, which is God, right, is something that we recognize is something that we follow, that we worship, that many we bow down to, right? We idolize it. So even if right now you say I'm an atheist, I don't believe in anything, I don't follow God, I don't worship God. There's something you worship. You might worship your kids. You might worship your parents, right? These are the things that might. I remember I grew up and I didn't believe in God growing up. So I was an atheist and I didn't think there was anything. And so what I did believe was that I believed my dad was the ultimate authority on everything. He knew everything. He understood everything. He fixed everything in the house. He provided for us. So he was, and of course I didn't understand it at the time, but he was my God in my home. And so that was who I followed. And as I got older, obviously you start to recognize that there's fault in there, not horrible fault, but he's not perfect. He's not a perfect human being. And so then it was hard to put things in place because he was still my God and I still needed to follow him. But I was having some trouble as I was becoming an adult and understanding things a little bit differently, right? So I was having trouble with this connection. So even if you don't worship the God, you worship a God. So a God is something that we idolize, something that we turn to, something that we depend on, something that we believe kind of knows all. Maybe the news is your God, right? So there's all kinds of different gods that we follow. So understanding that the Lord is their God. The Lord is the God, the thing that they idolize, worship, and follow. The Lord means he is self existent and eternal. So it means that nothing needed to create him. He was before we were. He will always be, even if we are no longer. And he was able to do anything and everything all on his own. So, and he created the universe and he created the stars, the sea. He created gravity. He created everything he created us as human beings. So the Lord, this self existent being, is the thing that we idolize, the thing that the Israelites, idolize, right? So this is why it's two different things, which we kind of go, why? What's the big deal? It's important that we know who our God is, right? Who do you follow? You follow the one that's self-existent and the one that didn't need anything or anybody to be, and the one that made everything, right? That's the one that I felt. That's the God. That's the thing that I worship. Okay. So when he says the Lord consistently in this book, he just keeps talking about, he's kind of naming him. But he is the God that the Israelites follow. So just to kind of be clear on that, because I thought it was interesting that he had both of them together, which I think comes along later as well. All right. So moving on from that. So he's letting them know, after I know I gave that whole big thing, but then he's letting them know that he did all of these things for them. So remember, I saw this and I you guys don't have full understanding, and but you know that none of your stuff wore out, and I did all these miracles for you in the wilderness, and so I'm the one that you need to follow. And so he says, when you go in there, when you reach this place, you took out all these kings and defeated them, right? So remember that I did all these things for you. And then verse 9, then so because of all that, right? Because of all the things I did for you, verse 9, carefully follow the terms of this covenant so that you may prosper in everything that you do. So there's a point and a purpose for him to have a covenant. The Lord will always keep his side of the covenant. We're the ones that mess up with the side of the covenant. And so then it says, you may prosper. And then it says, all of you are standing in the presence of the Lord today. And so it lists all the people that are standing there. And I am making this covenant with its oath, not only to you, to everybody that's standing in front of you who are standing in here, but also with those that are not here today. It's so open-ended. I don't know if it means their descendants. I don't know if it means us, right? Anyone who believes. It's just left a little bit open. I don't know if there were people that were sick that were unable to make it at that time. So I'm not 100% sure what it means, but I know that it is in there. And so I think that there's a point and purpose for it being in there, that it's everybody that's standing in front of him, plus those who aren't there today. All right, so I want to move on. He says in verse 16, you yourself know how we lived in Egypt and how we passed through the countries on the way here. So you saw all of these things, making sure that no man or woman among you today whose hearts turn away from the Lord our God go and worship the other gods in these nations. Make sure there's no root. So I was just with my group a couple of nights ago, and one of the things that they said, and I don't remember how we got it started, but one of the things that they said is that good news travels to two people. So when you have good news, it travels to two people. Bad news travels to 8 people. And then that bad news travels to 8 more people, and 8 more people, 8 more people. Get it? So on and so on and so on. For whatever reason, whatever's in our hearts, we love spreading gossip. Sometimes we love chaos. I hear so many people tell me they don't love chaos, and yet we love chaos. We love, which story do you hear more of? The friend's kid who goes away to college and has an amazing time in college, or the one that has turned away and has gotten into drugs or drinking or partying, right? That's the one that tends to spread more than the one that's doing great. No one seems to want to really talk so much about the one that's doing great. And so we just love to spread this negativity. And I say that because what he's doing is giving, again, a very literal interpretation of that. He's saying, when someone is in your tribe and they are turning you away from me, then you need to root them out. That needs to be gone out of you, because that spreads like a poison. It's dangerous and it's destructive. And so before it starts to spread like a poison, you need to combat that at its root, and you need to, like I said, either get rid of it or, right, it doesn't say clearly here, but it says it needs to be rooted out, and it needs to be found, and it needs to be stopped. And so you can't have those kinds of things spreading. And just to kind of hit this question before maybe this question comes in, this idea of isn't God big enough to hear complaints, or isn't God, or like, it's a cult when you shut yourself out from hearing anything else. And I think that's not well, first of all, these are the Israelite people. So again, I want to say that they're slightly different. But I also want to say that's not the point. The point is not that these people are coming and asking questions, or these people are coming and they're confused, or they're having a hard time. These people are coming in and they're actively attempting to turn people away from the true God. So whether it be because they don't know who the true God is, and so they just are actively trying to teach you something that's not true, or because they literally don't believe and they want to make sure that you don't believe either, because it's foolish to believe. Either of those things are not people who would be willing to be listening, or to be in a conversation, or to be talking, but those are people who are actively trying to turn God's people away from God. And that is where the danger comes in. It's not from the questions, it's not from being around people who don't believe, but it's around people, it's around people who are actively trying to turn you against God. And again, I kind of continue to talk about the movement. And I know more and more people who are deconstructing are like shooting out this deconstruction information to anyone they know that believes, and they're just as actively trying to convince them not to believe, right? And so that is dangerous. That needs to be sort of cauterized at its root, so we don't fall into those traps, right? We need to remember who God is, not who these other people, these other things to worship are, even if it's just worshiping ourselves. And so that's where I think he's going with that, instead of, trying to tell people like, oh la la, don't listen to anything that's not me. I think he's trying to do it for your good, not your downfall. All right. So moving to verse 22. So 22, it says, your children will follow in later generations, and foreigners who come from distant lands will see the calamity. So if you turn away from, and if you go start following other gods, because unfortunately you will, then you're going to see calamities, and everyone's going to see it. Everyone's going to know, and they're going to know why, and they're going to say, what happened? And people are going to say, these people turned away from God. So people are going to recognize it. And again, it's all going to point back to God. So this is to our own destruction. This is not to the destruction of God. This is to our own. And so then I want to go to verse 29 here, which I thought was an interesting verse. Verse 29 says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. This brings me back to verse 4, where in verse 4 it said, just to reiterate, I know I said it twice, but to this day the Lord has not given you a mind that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear. And so it says, so then verse 29 again saying, it's the secret things belong, right? So there's still secret things, and those things belong to the Lord, right? We don't know them yet. We don't have the privilege of knowing those things yet. The Israelites do not have the privilege. And, for us, they didn't know Jesus, right? They didn't know Jesus was coming. They knew what they knew at the time. So secret things belong to them. And it says, but the things revealed belong to us and our children forever. The things revealed are good enough. We don't need everything. The things revealed at that time are the things that God revealed for a purpose, the things that God gave to us for a purpose, and it is enough. And what's important is that we know those things. So why am I doing this? So we know those things. If we don't know those things, we can't live in those things. And what God is saying is God is saying, I still hold my secret things. You don't need to know my secret. You don't need to know everything, right? I'm not giving you the reason. I'm not giving you everything. But what you do you know? Are you listening? Are you holding it in your heart? So when you fall or when trial or temptation comes, that's there, or aren't you? And that's what I stress on everybody, because I think that we need to not only know what we're supposed to know, but we also need to share what we're supposed to know, right? So if something comes up, one of these people come in and this poison comes in and they think that they're doing good by telling you something that's untrue. Do you know how to respond to that? Do you know what God has given you? Because he's given you a lot. He has filled you with, even up to this point, which is, my gosh, we're not even, we look at, this is where I am, right? We're like, what, a sixth of the way in, right? That right there is enough to know what God did, right? And so he said, I gave you enough. What you know, it's been revealed to you. All right, I want to move on to chapter 30. So in this chapter, I'm going to try and go through a little bit quicker. In verse 1, it says, when all these blessings and curses I have set before you come on you, and you take them to heart wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God, and obey him with all your heart and all your soul, according to everything I command you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you. So right now there is confirmation that they're going to go. It says when, it doesn't say if. And so they're going to be scattered. I'm not sure how many generations, we'll find out as we read along, but they are going to be scattered. But what I find really interesting, it says, when all these blessings and cursings I have set before you come on you, and you take them to heart. So there's some connection, right, to his people in Israel, that even when they're scattered, there's a connection to the Lord, that they won't necessarily forget everything. I'm not saying they're following him. It seems like they clearly aren't. Calamities come on. He sends them to other nations. He disperses this people group into many, many different places, possibly, right? Like, we're not sure necessarily where they're going. But what we know is they do get scattered, and because they stopped following him. And so there's something that they're going to turn towards him again. And when they do, then he's going to circumcise their hearts again. So I'm not sure, again, if right now there's just a connection to the Israelite people, right? And then maybe once we all become believers, there's some sort of connection. I'm not sure. I don't know necessarily. I think it's something worth really studying and exploring a little bit. And maybe we don't know. Maybe this is one of the secrets that he's talking about. But what we know is then the people turn toward him, right? And then they come back, right? And then once they come back, he then circumcises their heart again. So he sort of refreshes the covenant with them, circumcises their hearts so that they can be his people again. So it seems like, in some ways, it's like a multi-step process. And I'm sure it's not like, well, day one it happens here, day two, right? But it's this process that happens internally inside of us that we start to turn towards him, and then he draws us in and circumcises his hearts. And again, this is to the Israelites, so this is already to his own people, the people that he has lifted up and brought out of Israel, right? And so they do come back, and he does take them back because he has a covenant with them. They have turned away from the covenant. So I want to go to verse 15. So in 15 it says, I'm going to go to 11 first. It says, now what I'm commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach, which is kind of funny because it probably is difficult. It's not up in heaven, so it's not out of the sky. You can't, it's not out of the sky, so you can't find it. It's not all the way in the depths of the sea, so you can't reach it. But it's the word is very near you. So he's giving, again, he's writing this down, right? And we're going to find out where he puts it. He's writing all this down, and he gives it to you. It's right here in front of you. You see it. What do I do? Don't know what to do. Yes, you do. You look in this book. You find out what you need to do. He says, but then go to 15. But see, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. So you have all of these things right in front of you. So on this side, you have life and prosperity. And on this side, you have death and destruction. I've showed you both, right? You have both. This one, life and prosperity, is through God. Death and destruction is turning away from the Lord your God and following your own gods and your own idols. So he presents both. Which one are you going to choose? And same here, right? Like when I do this and when I'm reading, I get the ability through reading God's word to present both. Which choice are you going to make, right? And sometimes I don't want to say it's a daily choice because I think that, but sometimes it's a daily choice, right? Is today going to be a day that leads to prosperity in life, or is today going to be the day that leads to death and destruction? And I'm just going to turn away from God. And so he's given the choice, and what choice do they make? All right, so then we go down to, I want to go to verse 1 in 31. It says, Moses went out and spoke all these words to Israel. So again, I'm kind of thinking this is a different speech. So remember before he summoned all of Israel to him. Now he's going to go out and he's going to speak it. He's 120. This is it. His time has come. He's done. He's going to be passing the baton. He said, I'm no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. So again, I just look at Moses like, God has already said, you're done. You're not going any further. This is it for you. And yet Moses is still so honoring of everything God asks him to do. It's 120 years old. God's like, go out and talk to the people. Okay, I'm going to go out and talk to the people. Warn the people. Don't let them fall into these traps. Okay, I'm going to go out and warn the people. Right? And I joke and say, okay, like he's doing it really in a somber way, but he's probably not, because the Lord said he was humble and he loved God. So he's going out and he's doing all of these things, even in recognition that he's not going to get to enjoy. He had to go in the wilderness for 40 years. He's not going to enjoy the land that has all the things that he does not have at this time. So he's been camping in his hundreds. All right. And then, so then he's telling them that Joshua is going to be their new leader. Joshua is going to take them in the land. And he says, don't be afraid. You know what I did for you already. So don't be afraid, because our nature is to be afraid. Verse 7, it says, then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel. So Moses is then talking to his predecessor, who's going to be Joshua. Be strong and courageous. You must go with his people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them. You must divide it as an inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you, and he will be with you. So Joshua's got to now lead these people, which, tough. I wouldn't want to be a huge leader at this time because people are difficult. So the Lord is going to lead this obstinate and stiff-necked people that God has called them on multiple occasions, and he's going to take them and he's going to move them into the land of Canaan, right? Going to war against a bigger and better people. And then once he gets in there, he's got to deal with all of their issues. He's got to spread the land amongst all of them, right? Like all these things are so hard to do. And so he's saying that Joshua is going to be the new person to do this. And he's saying to Joshua, be courageous, stand strong. God is going to be in front of you, right? He's going to protect you. He's going to be there for you. All right, so then in verse 9, it says, Moses wrote down this law and he gave it to the Levitical priests. So everything that we are reading, and everything that we are reading was in the Ark of the Covenant. So if you guys remember how important the Ark of the Covenant was, it was the place where God was. The 10 Commandments were in there, and this was in there. and we get to read it. We get to enjoy it. This is God's words that he had Moses put down and put in this ark, the place where God is. And then every 7 years it was brought out and it was read to all of the people so they would remember who God was. So nobody forgot. And we get to read it all the time. We get to learn what he said. We get to hold that stuff in our hearts all the time. This is, I think, more glorious than we recognize, that something that was in the ark and that was protected from everybody and read only by priests at one time can now be read by us individually at all times. And then before he leaves, he says, I'm going to put this in the ark. And then the Lord says to Moses, your time is coming. And he said, call Joshua and present yourself. So he's going to, then God's going to essentially pass the baton to Joshua. And then in verse 19, it says, write down this song and teach it to the Israelites. So tomorrow we're going to read what this song is. And this is a song, again, for them to remember, to know who God is, and to cherish him forever and ever. So today we're ending on that note. And I think it's a really good place to end. I think that this is an exciting time for the Israelites because they're changing hands. And we'll see what happens tomorrow. We're going to see what the song says, and maybe hopefully remember some pieces of it. If you guys like this, if this was a blessing to you, if this helped you in any way, if it helped you understand the story better or understand your own walk with the Lord, please like this page. Please share it with as many people as possible so others can be blessed by it. So we can continue to spread the word of God out to everybody so they can be blessed as well. And I want you to subscribe to the page. That way you can get it every day. Otherwise, you may or may never find it again. So thank you guys for sticking with me, and keep reading. I'll see you next time.